Okay, Kathy, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, as usual, I'm a constant sort of digger of data, and not only as it relates to my job in Boulder County, but just because I just like that kind of stuff, is a little bit of the nerd side. So what I found that I wanted to share with folks is, and we had some earlier discussions about the environmental sort of justice mapping, looking at ways to document that. And staff has shared with us the Colorado Public Health site on the Brownfield site. But I came across this one, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here. Hopefully folks can see this mapping. It's from the Environmental Protection Agency. I don't know if ever folks had seen this mapping program. It's on environmental justice type of thing. So what I've highlighted here is diesel particulates. And you can kind of see here's our west area, planning area. It's not totally defined, but certainly it's very distinctive with Sloan's Lake over there to the north, and then 6th Avenue sort of intersecting the right. And we can certainly see I-25 on the east, and then Varnum and Valverde south of 6th Avenue. And what I wanted to highlight is just different components that this mapping program provides from the EPA. So what this one has done was show the 2017 diesel particulate matter. So it gives you a scale on the map as well. And we can certainly see in at least 2017 pretty high levels as it relates to national percentiles of diesel particulate matter, and particularly Sun Valley and Valverde, right against that sort of industrial area that we've all been talking about. But also we do see some pockets over here in Villa Park, some in West Colfax and Barnum. So it does give us another view on maybe looking at our neighborhoods with that environmental justice sort of lens. And I just wanted to share that with you. And so you can change it around to different components to reflect that particular attribute. So this one's looking at air toxic cancer rate risk. Again, you have the scale on the right that kind of gives you what that is talking about. Particulate matter, so again, kind of shows what we probably are not surprised about, that we're seeing along these highways, different issues that relates to particulate matter, ozone impacts on air. Here's one on traffic proximity. So again, that high volume area along those major highways. But it also has some interesting things too in regards to like lead paint or maybe Superfund proximity. So I will share the link in the chat so you can kind of play around with it. But it does give you at least a way to sort of see some different components. And you can also even look at some demographic information as well too, whether it would be looking at people of color and where they're located. Again, I think that's based more on the American Community Survey that was done in that mid-year time between the decennial census. But unemployment rates, so it gives us sort of that comparison when we talk about all this mapping and comparing the mapping to tell us that story of what's going on. This perhaps can also be a useful tool to see how it does relate to different health disparities that we're seeing in our neighborhoods that we want to bring attention to, and to see how perhaps this plan could help move us forward with some solutions that tie to the recommendations within this plan. So I thought this was a really useful piece of mapping that really gets us down to those levels that I think we want to begin looking at and really beginning to sort of see how environmental justice issues are impacting our neighborhoods and what that means and how we can perhaps change that narrative. I'm going to stop sharing. Let me share the link in the chat. So I invite you to click on it, play around with it, look at different components of it, and the EPA seems to have a pretty good component of different attributes. I think that will help inform our recommendations. So I don't know if anybody has any questions or curiosities.
Yeah, Kathy, I actually do have a question, and thank you. This is very helpful, and I can see that others in the chat also thought so as well. So I guess like from the West team perspective and like trying to really unpack how we can integrate this and what that might look like. And Cortland, thinking about the different social determinants that we already look at through Blueprint and through like the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. I'm talking about things like, you know, the access to healthcare, the child obesity rates, the lifespan rates. We already have a lot of that embedded in the introduction and some of it in the neighborhood chapters. So I wonder if it's just a matter of identifying from this group which other determinants we would want to mention. And then Cortland, if it is possible to add in those type of existing conditions. Now, understanding this isn't like a Denver map, but this is data, right? And I think statewide, right, Kathy? So that would be my question, I think, for both the group and for MPI leadership, just trying to think about unpacking this one.
Well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of snapshots that are very helpful to name that are related to our built environment choices. And so if our quality of life section or the introduction section that is an expanded state of equity and vitality in the neighborhoods, like I don't know where it all belongs, but in
Sure.
the foreground, if that's sort of the state of how things are, then it might make sense in an introduction sort of area where we do kind of unpack the equity vitality challenges. But what I put in the chat is that, like, when you see those cumulative exposures, being able to unpack the story behind that. Kathy always emphasized what's the story behind this map, and to have a narrative. Like there's a story behind why particulate matter looks like that. And that story is related to past mobility infrastructure investments and past land use choices around keeping something predominantly industrial with certain lack or whatever of like performance zoning around that. And so being able to tell the story of like why is this, and which sections of the plan are part of addressing it. Like there are ways to make sure that we have more opportunities to have walkable streets. There are ways to be able to make sure that there's trees and barriers to the I-25 pollution in the industrial area. That some of that might be a tree canopy intervention. We need the tree canopy for Heat Island, which is another, indicator that we'll have in those maps. But being able to be like, oh, well, tree canopy, that specific green infrastructure investment will likely address both Heat Island and a barrier to some of the particulate matter. And like, trees, for better or for worse, it's not good for the trees and it's really hard for the tree to survive, but like the leaves are a physical barrier to some of that, even if they can't metabolize those pollutants themselves. I don't know, like but basically, like if we're able to list those and then use them to say, we anticipate, like look to the mobility section to see how we are investing in transportation solutions that minimize these harmful pollutants. Look to our economy and housing section to see how we are investing in green jobs that actually reduce environmental burdens and even create environmental benefits. And look to our quality of life section where we talk about the green infrastructure investments that we're addressing there. So, that's a practical way where some of these can be used. And what I love about what Kathy shared, and I included the state tool that just launched that I don't know much about. For those who are interested in being part of the equity research team for the Metro Denver Nature Alliance, we have a meeting on Friday, and David Rojas, who leads that tool, will be presenting about it. They're still getting public feedback about it, but I think it's helpful if we foreground in the, like, if it is in the intro where there, what does equity and vitality look like, that we give people there's a static thing for the report, but having people who use this tool know where that performance data lives and is updated, will also be really helpful, because this is going to be something of a snapshot looking forward, but thankfully we have resources that will allow for dynamic updating.
Mhm, mhm. Sean, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I like Elizabeth's input. I also think, well, Kathy's presentation was awesome. I think it's kind of two problems in a way. The one, I think, is a straightforward answer, which is why is there so much particulate matter? Why is there so much diesel stuff? Is because of, I think, because of the proximity to I-25, 6th Avenue. But in terms of the other set of data, which is, why is it lots of unemployed, or why is it that? That's a more complicated answer. I don't know if that's something we need to unpack and why that's going on. I don't know if there's an explanation we have, but also going back to the particulate matter and all that. I mean, Kathy's brilliant idea of covering 6th Avenue will cost $1 zillion. And I guess at the same time, if you cover I-25, will cost $1 zillion. But that sure would go a long way to fixing that problem, I guess. I don't know how that works. It'll be, it'll be like incredibly awful air down there in the tunnel, but it'll make, our area cleaner. So I don't know how that works. It's $1 zillion. It's air purifiers, it's whatever, but that would certainly go a long way, at least towards the problem of the particulate matter and the CO2 and all that. But that other trickier question of why is there so many unemployed? Why is there so many other, demographic groups, perhaps? That's kind of a trickier question. I don't know how to unpack that.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Sean, about the why, because when you begin to look at these more complex problems and you start digging into the why, it begins to get to that root cause. And so there's a methodology around that of how do you get to the root cause of these problems. And a lot of times what you have to do is ask why more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times, 4 times, until you finally identify what that root cause is. So yes, I think some of it will unfold itself that yes, it's because of redlining, and we subjugated low income people of color communities to these situations. Now, how do we repair that? When you're talking about how the repair could be done, maybe on 6th Avenue to make more green space, that might help us to get toward that. Whether we need air filters with it like they have on I-70, I don't know. Maybe it's more of a connection and continuing to bridge how 2 neighborhoods of Villa Park and Barnum were split up because of the highway. But when we start digging deeper into that, I think it begins to unfold those whys. And that's more of what I see as an opportunity in the quality of life to begin to dissect those, analyze them, and start to beginning reparative methods to deal with them. When I think of the other things that I've shared in regards to green zones and green jobs that Elizabeth mentioned, we start to begin to look outside the box, looking at LA County, Los Angeles County, and what they're doing with their ordinance on green zones in industrial areas, how that impacts, how it could change the landscape of the industrial areas. And if not now, when? So to me, it begins to see this document, this 20, 30-year document, as a way to start making that reparative story and begin to look at deeper, and also providing the reasoning behind it, that it's not coming out of the blue. It's been intentionally done, and it can be intentionally undone, or at least more reparative in that move. I remember recently Eugene talking about brownfields being funded along Federal Boulevard. a considerable amount of money. So I'm kind of wondering, well, where did that go? You know, our task is always going to be, how do we put those pieces together? How do we create this new counter narrative to what has happened as a way to make reparative moves forward in the future for the next generations and several generations, that more long view sort of approach. And that's to me what this whole plan is about. It's a long view.
Thank you, Kathy. And I want to just take a quick pause here because I see that Yvonne has now joined us and Eugene has also joined us. So thank you all for coming. And all we have done so far is Kathy has shared earlier a map of sort of an environmental justice map and following up our conversations from last week around brownfields. So that's kind of where we are now. And just kind of asking some questions around unpacking this. What might this look like, integrating this type of work into the plan? And I want to go, make some space for MPI for either Cortland or Chelsea. Do we have any follow-up questions on sort of the information that has been given to us so far this evening by Kathy and how we can better integrate that? Or make it possible? Is it possible, right? Because we have these indicators that we've been using traditionally through the plans given the citywide guidance.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely possible. And we already have a lot of data, like you pointed out, related to how this stuff affects people, right? Like it's more focused on health, but obviously there must be a relationship between the environmental quality and the health, right, that we already have in that section. I think it's more about identifying what of all of this data is, the most connected, because nobody's going to be able to process the whole thing, right? So we have to identify like which pieces in here are the ones that are especially related and relevant to what the plan, is making recommendations on. But generally, we try not to bog down a plan with too much existing conditions data. You put enough in there, to justify or support the recommendations, but it shouldn't be just like something where people can't find the vision for the future and they're just looking at a bunch of data. That's what our existing conditions reports are for. And, we did that work, 3 years ago at the beginning of this process. And, the idea is that you learn from that and then that informs, what the recommendations are that, for the future and moving forward. So that's really where we have to keep the focus. But I totally understand the need to make these connections.
Well, I think part of the connection too, if we do go with performance zoning, like maybe being able to look at what are some of those key performance indicators, or like, are there of all of the SDIs, like, existing conditions, there's so many different metrics that all matter in terms of well-being, but maybe there are some that give us a better sense of how different things are interacting. Like the PM indicator, like particulate matter, might be able to tell us a lot about what's happening, both with traffic and with pollution, like two different things that are important. There may be, if we move towards some sorts of performance zoning in the industrial zones for Sun Valley and Valverde, like cumulative exposures are the big concern for EJ communities, and Valverde and Sun Valley are exposed both the I-25 and the industrial zone that needs the highway, and has, especially Valverde, has those major semis moving through the neighborhood as well. And so I think that question, Cortland, is really key. You don't want to overwhelm people in data, but if there are some things that we think these are areas we want to track to make sure that the recommendations in this plan for the industrial zone, if we go with performance zoning, these are things that we will be monitoring to hold development accountable to the equity and vitality goals. I don't know what those are. I would think particulate matter would be key there, because it is something that comes from multiple sources as well. But I think there's the other element of just like the maps are so helpful to see the patterns, and the SDIs are in the report, life expectancy is in there, but being able to see how it that particular metric shows out on a scale is important. And we saw that too with how COVID affected the neighborhoods. It affected Valverde much more than other neighborhoods because there was already that level of vulnerability.
And before we move on, Eugene, I know you just jumped on, but is there anything that you'd like to add to this discussion?
No, just really listening. These challenges with regard to pollution and brownfields, we have had those conversations before. And as we look to enhance areas in the plan, I think that there's opportunity to do that. So I'm here just, of course, to listen. And I do have to jump off in a little while here. Unfortunately, this was the evening I had a conflict with.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you, Eugene. And we are gonna, just for the collective group, we are going to end as early as we can. Yvonne, just acknowledging your item that is going to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board this evening at 5:30. So if we can try to conclude by maybe even 5:15 to give you all a 15-minute bracket to take some time from this meeting, make sure that your technology is all set up. I'm sure a lot of us in this space want to be a part of that conversation and might even be signed up for some windows to speak. So we want to make sure to acknowledge that and end a little bit early. So thank you, Eugene. Any follow-up from our team or any follow-up from the group for our team?
Well, I'm always excited about how we can start integrating this into the quality of life section. Yes, Cartlin, I agree. We have some existing conditions, but I'm hoping this also fuels more of a conversation of what particularly Elizabeth mentioned, the cumulative effect and how that really needs to be driven within the quality of life to try to make that reparative argument of why researchers should go this way. And so I'm really anticipating that we can start to do that and start to see evidence of how that shift is happening.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I don't want to move us forward too quickly, but we can go ahead and start up our discussions around economy and housing if everybody's okay with moving forward. Any head nods, thumbs ups? All right.
And I guess a transition question to hold, the question Cortland named about how do we choose those metrics. I think for our economy and housing part of what we're trying to look at is how we can have economic development that contributes to the well-being of the neighborhood, not only with jobs, but with jobs that are part of a health-giving, life-giving economy, not one of extraction, exploitation, and exclusion. And so if we can think about, I don't know how to have this conversation and I haven't given it enough thought myself, but I know that there are some indicators that do like help you get a bigger sense of the system effects and how things are interacting that are useful to track. And if we can, like, one of the things that we named was important for the implementation section is to have some key quality of life metrics that we're tracking. Like life expectancy is great to be able to track, but it might not necessarily tell you what's going on and how to intervene on it. And so like, I don't know, but taking a systems lens to look at how can we, what feedback do we want to build into accountability to be able to make good responsive choices and how we adjust things.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right. And I see Yvonne posted the information for tonight's meeting in case anyone wants to sign up and join, whether that's to speak in a 3-minute window in support or just listen in to the item. It will start at 5:45 exactly, but the meeting does start at 5:30. Okay, I'm going to share the screen. And I just, again, thinking about as we're starting to conclude our sessions with, this is number 6 of 8, and it's gone so fast. For me at least. I don't know how you all feel, but do want to bring us back and sort of just, I'm sorry about the flipping, but as our team has been preparing and trying to be very intentional with making sure that we cover all that we said we would in our working group number 1, I did want to just kind of bring this back to, and again, this is not everything. I want to remind us, we have a spreadsheet of, I think it's now 300 plus comments. And Chelsea, can you confirm, is that including our public comment tracking as well?
That is not. So I think we have a few hundred more comments from the public tracking, but I think just from the steering committee and small working group, we have about 300.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to reiterate that because while there's just a few words on these slides, this is not everything. So this is simply to bring up what we have covered and what we have not, and kind of how, just kind of give you all some transparency on how we would like to trek in closing up the last 3 sessions. So tonight we'll spend the remainder of our time on economy and housing. The next big section is going to be mobility, which we kind of went back and forth on. We were going to do that tonight, but since Heidi is unable to join us, we went ahead and, accommodated the request to move that to next week so that she would be available. And so I want to just, take us back to economy and housing. And really the last session that we'll have will be more of an informal kind of just workshopping review summary of everything that we've captured to date through the 8 working group sessions, ultimately so that we can do a bigger share out with the larger steering committee. And again, Eugene is going to be working here very closely with Renee Martinez Stone over the next few days to figure out how we resolve the conflict. Thank you, Elizabeth, for reminding us of that this morning. And we're thinking that we might have the steering committee towards the end of the month, just given that we'll be wrapping up our working group meetings on the 27th of this month. And so any questions before we get back into the content and the mapping, just on logistics and stuff moving forward?
No, but you mentioned Renee in that meeting, and it might, I don't know that I heard everything that you said, but Renee wants to be plugging back in now, having had a process like it. We checked in, and it's a time where she thinks she can be helpful. And
Okay.
so,
Okay.
there is going to be some part of the agenda for the WDRC meeting that we'll be talking about the plan. And I don't know, I just wanted to give a heads up there in case it was useful to be thinking about whether it's time for anyone from CBD or for steering committee members who would be attending to be ready to share something. There should be a little bit of time. And
Okay.
then most of the time, I think Jennifer Newcomer is going to be presenting on really important data about the relationship to schools, our school data,
Mhm.
insights about gentrification and housing. So just teeing up a resource for all of us.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that added context, Elizabeth. I'm sure Chelsea captured all of that, and we'll follow up internally. And since Eugene is coordinating, we'll just make sure that we stay on top of that. So thank you so much. Any other
Yeah.
questions? Oh, go ahead,
I was
Eugene.
just gonna add, just in case this group isn't aware, but we've been coordinating with WDRC before we actually started this project. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
and a lot of the displacement conversations related to school data that Jennifer is going to present on is information we've been tracking and following really since 2018, 2019. So we've been following that conversation as well, just for background.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing the new data that's come out.
Awesome. Anybody else? Questions, comments before we move forward? All right, not hearing anything. Okay, so I guess the question goes back to this group because this is your meeting. I put this slide up because again, this is kind of a summary for us to start in case you want to start kind of just thinking about the things that we've heard so far, at least some of them in these different buckets. And or we can pull up maps. I've got all of our existing maps ready to rock and roll, the recommendation maps, our neighborhood maps, and then just overarching in general that Chelsea originally created for us. So how would we like to begin this conversation? Would it be helpful to look at some maps back to back, or do we want to kind of unpack some of these bullets here that we haven't had a chance to unpack yet?
I feel like we pretty thoroughly worked up and down all of the map packet at this point, unless there were pages I'm forgetting or miss. So I'd love to hop into the bullets here.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, is everybody else okay with that?
I guess I'd also like to see how it ties to the maps as it relates to economy and housing
Yeah.
as we get into these different bullet points.
Absolutely. And then what I'll just need from the team is just direction on which map we want to pull up and look at with regards to the bullet or the conversation we're having. So that might be really helpful for me. And so let's unpack economy. If we want to just take just a minute to read through these 4 bullets. And again, there's no names attached to these. This is general feedback that we've gotten from the small working group specifically. So however we want to start to unpack this, please feel free to just share.
I love those bullets, and I don't know that it's worth looking at it, but I'm remembering that how much I didn't understand the maps that did pertain to the types of jobs. Like I couldn't understand how, like at what geographic scale things were done, or why there's some patterns that had surprised me, if I remember, about like why retail or commercial showed up in a particular area or a seemingly really narrow belt in one place. I don't remember. I don't know if it's useful to look at, but I know that I don't remember. I remember being confused, and I don't know what the maps tell us and if it's useful for us to get that spatial context.
Well, I can speak a little bit to that. In most cases, if not entirely, we mapped where zoning allows for commercial business retail uses. So that the map related to where zoning allows for those types of activities to occur is based off of existing conditions. There are a few
But
instances
that
where,
job diversity map is based on zoning.
oh, not this map, no. Not this map. This is about pure job numbers.
Eugene, which map are you speaking to so I can go to that one?
But
Yeah,
this is, I think this is the one that I was also I can't remember, but I think like, that section, I don't know, like I was surprised that there were corridors that didn't have like I would have thought that the like West Colfax that does have a lot of commercial would have showed up there. I'm gonna pull up the map for myself too.
Yeah, and this isn't necessarily a map that is geographically based. I think that this map, if I remember correctly, is based off of census tracts. So we're not suggesting that all of Sun Valley be manufacturing, but we are saying that the predominant job type happens to fall into manufacturing. But this isn't where we're talking about mapping it. This is really a reflection of, again, existing conditions and where jobs, the predominant job foundation and how that information is captured.
Areas that don't get flagged on that, it could be because there aren't many jobs, but it could also be because it's more of a balanced economic base and there isn't a predominant type.
Would you like me to go back to the jobs diversity one, Elizabeth? I was wondering because you were saying commercial retail. That's why I went to future places, but I can go back to the jobs diversity one.
Yeah, like I don't know, in my head, I remembered it slightly looking differently, but even if the legend named that it was, you know, it looks like the only retail that shows up is Valverde. Like this map doesn't help me really understand what's going on. And maybe if it named, like Eugene specified, that this was census tract data, and like maybe that little red area in West Colfax is part of a larger census tract that is cut off, and that's why it looks like this small little area, that I didn't know what geographic extent was used to generate the data. Maybe there's
Okay.
a map that uses dot density or something that can show how those three types show up. I don't know. I looked at it and it was like, I don't know how to interpret this. Doesn't really make intuitive sense. And I couldn't tell with the legend.
Really, with this map, I think should be conveying to anyone looking at it is that there are opportunities to increase job diversity in key areas. So looking at Valverde, for example, it's pretty heavy in manufacturing. So there could be opportunities to introduce other types of employment opportunities in that area so that it's not so dependent upon any one particular category. So it's really not so much not trying to suggest a recommendation, but really is, I believe, trying to communicate there are opportunities, and we have an opportunity to diversify our workforce in these areas, and here's what's leading today.
Cool. Just one
And
idea to reflect the diversity, because you can't tell what the color means in terms of a number or diversity. Like if you've got census blocks or tracts that have all three of those types, if you represented them by a dot density map, it would be a lot easier to tell, oh, there are a lot of red dots, and each of the red dots represents X people, just like every X jobs. You'd be able to see where there is innovation and track that pattern, and the places that are like balanced, you'd be able to tell because they've got a constellation of those colors.
all right, I have to go now, so I
Thank you,
apologize for that.
Eugene.
And I'll talk to you all later.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Eugene.
Jean.
I'm also wondering with this map too on job diversity of if there any way to identify in a sense who has those jobs. Are there people that live here having those jobs, or are they coming from the outside into this area to have the manufacturing job, or, and that might be how we start looking at creating that balance and having green jobs for local residents as a recommendation. I mean, I see E5 of that recommendation of preserve and expand employment base of the existing West Area Manufacturing District, the heavy production value manufacturing, while improving the built and natural environment for adjacent residential use and promotion of sustainable development. So to me, it plays into a couple of those different maps. One is where are the jobs being held by residents, as well as looking at those green spaces or areas where there is a hard landscape between residential and commercial, industrial, and how can that be improved to promote that natural environment, the built environment and the natural environment working together along with those residential uses, and to get to that sustainable development. So what does that look like? And to me, that kind of goes back to creating those green jobs and green zones, maybe as it relates to the industrial area. So I think there's a lot we can look at with some of these maps and start putting them together.
Any follow-up or clarity needed from our team, Cortland or Chelsea?
Well, I think that, this map and the ones before it on the list, they were all from the Blueprint Denver equity package of maps, right? And I think in an earlier session, there was a lot of frustration of like, looking at an index of information that's pulled from 6 or 8 different sources, and just sort of, some of it's shaded darker and some of it's lighter, and why is it that way? I think there's been an appetite for more detail and understanding why it is the way that it is. But because these are the blueprint, like taken directly from that plan and something that we should look at for every plan, it's sort of, think of it more as like the big picture. And if we want to understand the details, then like the EPA maps we were looking at earlier, we can dig deeper and see things individually to understand why it is. But, we're kind of stuck with this map because it's the way that Blueprint crunched the numbers. It doesn't mean that it's the only thing that we can use or that we have to remain confused about it or anything, but this is how the information has been done citywide. And so to provide a consistent basis from one plan to the next, we should at least present that information. And then we can provide more where we need more detail on something or try to understand or unpack it in a different way. But
Thanks so much
don't
for
look
that.
for this map to like answer all your questions. It's really like, you look at it and you can say, there's heavy concentration of certain types of business in a handful of areas, and in most of the area, not a predominant concentration. And then we can, move on.
I mean, if it's possible to even like clarify with the legend what that map is, like if it is census blocks, like that's helpful, and adding it, like, I don't know, like it was just, if you got to include the exact same thing, totally cool. And if there's a way to be able to complement it with something that actually has a legend that allows you to interpret what's going on, would be super helpful. And it sounds like it could be at both and.
Right,
I'm sorry,
especially as
what
we get
could be
to
what?
recommendations. Yeah,
It could be a both and, like Blueprint
Oh,
is there, and then like, oh, this is what it looks like when you can see the dot density in a legend that's like, yeah, it's census, this is based on census tracts or blocks. I don't know. I'm guessing it's tracts, but I don't really know.
Okay.
yeah, I think we can. I mean, I don't think we would change this map, from the one that's being used to like present it in a different way and go with like kernel density instead of these shades of colors. I'm just saying that we can put in more information that's gets to more of what we're trying to get at, instead of trying to make this map do it for us. That's all.
Mhm. Is that helpful for anyone? Does anyone have any follow-up?
yeah, especially as it relates to the baseline. So when you go before a zoning review and planning boards or the city council, they're using these resources of the Blueprint Denver maps and neighborhood plans. And so if you're going to have a different narrative come out of it, you have to have additional data to sort of say, yes, we want to change this from what the baseline is of what Blueprint Denver in this particular case, because we also see X, Y, and Z also happening. And that, again, I could see how that fits into the recommendation on how the maps become integrated storytellers in a way too, of why the recommendation is what it is. If it's trying to create more green jobs, yes, we can say that we have this landscape of the baseline map and we want to shift it more in this direction. Because we have a lot of particulates and we have, hard landscapes, whatever it might be. We have urban heat zones areas,
Mhm. Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. It's 4:52. I do want to end the meeting at 5:15 if that's okay with everyone. So if there's nothing else to unpack under economy, I'd love to get us switched over to the housing component. And Just take a couple of minutes to read through this, see how we can unpack that and better understand from the team's perspective what this type of integration might look like, what we already have and what might be missing. So clarity on the term missing middle, we've already kind of discussed and unpacked that quite a bit in previous sessions. But if there are anything that we need to go back to, we can look at maps as well. I know that missing middle expansion and preservation was kind of a confusing terminology that we need to unpack a little bit more. Huge need for rentals at 30 to 50% AMI due to median incomes. More clarity of AMI within the plan, encourage engagement with community groups like Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, which I don't think have connected with yet. And so if there is a contact, providing it in the chat would be super helpful, because I don't think that has been a connection we've made yet. Does anyone want to unpack any of these in particular? Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, I think when we talked about clarifying the term of missing middle, and we start looking at those maps again and where it's located, it really would be important, I think, to see how it connects to the zoning that's there too already. Since we had a massive administrative rezoning of the area to allow for accessory dwelling units with single family units. So that again is a anti-displacement strategy, to be able to have somebody able to stay in place, as well as being able to afford being able to stay in place by earning income with the accessory dwelling unit. It's really all the work that the West Denver Renaissance Coalition or Collaborative has done, helps to sort of emphasize that shift already happening. So when I think of missing middle, to me, it's a disincentive, especially I'll speak for Villa Park, when we have this opportunity to keep the existing zoning and still have more units, but have the benefit potentially of staying in place and not being displaced. And that to me is an important component, one that allows for more density, but yet it doesn't sacrifice the person that lives there for another path forward. I mean, when I look at the striped areas, it may be a recommendation, but eventually somewhere along the line, you have to provide a path of how do you get there? And you still have to deal with it with the existing zoning code. And how you would get there, I'm sure would have to be a rezoning. So to me, that's encouraging a displacement when we've already gotten an administrative shift of the current zoning to allow the ADUs. So I think that needs to be cleared up.
Okay. And I'm curious, just thoughts or any additional feedback from the rest of the group on these points that are being brought up.
I appreciate all the points being brought up. I also think that the missing middle bit, what we want is, if we're going to have an increase in density, we want to have an increase in diversity, and that diversity includes diversity in terms of types of ownership options. So being able to see a diversity map that allows you to unpack where's limited equity housing or cooperative, and to the extent data is available, but to be able to at least name that when we say with diversity, we want diversity in ownership, and ownership can look like that. There's awesome language in the plan already that says that we want that. There's in the future, it would be a great thing to map. I know the data isn't really here, but being able to name that, and then that the diversity of housing types that allow for that. And that's what missing middle usually means. But we want diversity of those housing types, and being able to name that, see where ADUs are and where they're allowed, to be able to see other forms of those, what people call missing middle, but there's a diversity of types that are there, and be able to see from a map or from our definition of that diversity, if there are forms that a family with children or an elder would be able to use, probably not your standard row house. but that diversity is meeting the diversity of needs of different bodies. And then a third type of diversity that I know that we're interested in is like just the price point question, to be able to accommodate a mixed income community.
And I just want to quickly go back to Yvonne. I apologize. I think you had your hand up, Yvonne.
Oh,
Did you
sorry.
did you want to make a comment?
Well, it's kind of, you guys already went through that, but I have a meeting coming up with Shannon, who works for CASR, and she's bringing green jobs with monies. And so I think some of those questions under economy can possibly be answered with some of the solutions, not all of it, but some of the solutions. So I'm excited to see how that, because I love what Kathy said about, you know, how do we know these people that are working in the industrial area are also people that live in the community? Well, it doesn't sound like we can identify that, but now maybe setting up this with Shannon, we can start to track that. So I just wanted to give that comment.
Yeah, thank you for that so much, Yvonne. And actually, I'm writing a comment to Chelsea in the chat to ask if, Chelsea, if we can note to connect with Shannon from CASR, because thank you, Elizabeth, and others that connected us with a number of representatives from CASR. We've actually been actively working the last few weeks with Jorge Figueroa, who's doing all the needs assessment stuff. Bradley Patterson is working with Doug on like the food forest stuff and tree planting specifically in Valverde. Bernice Garcia Thayes is working on the low energy buildings ordinance and implementation of that. And we've got a number of others that I could go through, but we have not yet connected with Shannon. So we'll make sure to make that connection this week as well. Thank you, Yvonne. Oh, you're on mute, Yvonne.
Oh, I'm sorry. I could invite you to the meeting that I have set up, that I'm going to set up with her. She gave me some times, and so I'll be sending that out here soon, so I can make sure to include you.
Yeah, include Chelsea and myself as well.
Okay.
And if we can kill two birds with one stone and just get on the same page, that'd be great. Thank you for that. Kathy, go ahead. Sorry. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem. You want to let other voices come into the space as well. But I was looking at your agenda under the comments under economy and housing content, and the under housing comment about a huge need for rentals at 30 to 50% AMI due to median incomes. And yet what was coming up for me was thinking about that rental ownership map, and then identifying how is it that you're going to be able to create rental housing in that range. And how does that impact, you know, what threshold of density? Yes, we have the affordable housing component where 10 units or plus, as long as they don't do a cash, you know, in lieu of that requirement, then you end up having to go with multiple units. Maybe it's 20 units, and then you get part of those 20 units into this category because you've broken through to that affordable housing level. So I guess I'm just trying to see how you would even get there to be able to mandate. You know, there was sort of a little spark maybe in the state legislature looking at some rent control kinds of language, but that has been a very long haul, as I think we've seen that in most of the cases, our state legislature hasn't wanted to have that will. So I really sort of question about, is there a huge need for rentals in this range? And then even if there is, how do you even get it? You know, and then what does that do as far as an ownership rental dynamic within a neighborhood? How does that impact its stability?
Yeah, that's a complex one, Kathy. I wonder if others have any burning thoughts or feedback around that to share with the team.
But usually it requires a special deal or partnership, right? Like the market doesn't provide this on its own typically. The rents are much higher and they have a tendency to gravitate more to the luxury market, and everybody competes with for the people that have a lot of money because then they can make the most money, you know. So that's like sort of the market situation. And so usually, you know, it'd be like, you know, Denver's housing and stability department host, you know, partnering, competing for tax credits, you know, assembling a deal, with the developer who specializes in this kind of thing. And then usually then they'll make a big announcement of, we have such and such a partnership. And, there's some of that has happened, I think recently, like in Globeville, with the Laridan Foundation and creating new low-income affordable housing units there. And, that's how it's done typically, is through partnerships like that at this area median income range.
Jonathan, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so on the same topic, was just going to echo a lot of what Cortland said. Host and these departments have been pretty clear that, both locally, local departments like Host and just nationally, we're seeing that really under about 60% AMI, that's never something, well, not never, it is rarely something that market forces will provide, even with inclusionary zoning requirements. So those are pretty much only developed in partnerships or with direct subsidies from local or state sources. What's exciting about the inclusionary zoning ordinances, and this is part of the reason the city developed it, is that if the city doesn't have to spend as much of its limited pool of funds subsidizing everything from 0 to 120%, they can spend that same amount of money on that narrower section, like 50% and below, that truly requires it. Whereas the market actually can build for like 60% plus, and we can sort of leave that to the market with inclusionary to some extent. So that's exciting, but yeah, it does seem like 30 to 50% is never really going to be it. Well, we do have a couple of developers in town that go out of their way to provide 50%, like Zocalo. It's not a requirement, but they do it anyway because they just think it's the right thing to do. But for the most part, that's not really going to happen. On the AMI topic, though, I did see this point below, interesting clarity of AMI, how it works and how it's applied. I am not well informed enough about what's available in the Denver metro region as far as statistics go. But if this is possible with current data, or perhaps we expect it will be in the near term, like in the course of this plan's life, would be really cool, in my opinion, to see an encouragement for projects in our area to not use the area median income when calculating affordability limits, but rather what they call the small area median income. AMIs are calculated at the metropolitan region level. And as we know, like rents differ wildly by neighborhood in that area. So what we often see with the area median income is someone will say, well, this is affordable for like the 60% area, something along those lines. But that level of rent or that level of subsidy never reaches more expensive neighborhoods or more expensive segments of neighborhoods, because it's based on, the entire metro region instead of what's really happening here. So it's nice to see like area median rents and like area median incomes calculated on that smaller basis. So we're not just moving affordable units into only the lowest cost areas of town. I know it's getting like a little wonky here, and this is probably again better for something at like the citywide level than just our west area. But at least at our west area, it would be great if we were looking at like small area rents and small area incomes instead of citywide.
Yeah, thanks for that added feedback and perspective, Jonathan. Anybody have any follow-up, any comments to add? Shayla, did I see your hand up? Did you want to ask a question or chime in?
I did. I don't know how appropriate or applicable it is to our West area, but I know that just from working for a private developer in affordable housing for a while in 2019 and 2020, that they were able to purchase housing that was on a HUD contract that was about to expire, and re-up that contract, and it was in that 30 to 50% range. And so I don't know if there's any sites within our neighborhoods that are moving towards that. And so instead of having them expire and then go to the traditional market rate sale, if there's a way to identify any of those and create incentives for people to come in and agree to another 20 to 30 year contract to help continue to provide that 20 or 30 to 50% AMI. But yeah, I don't know that I don't have an idea of what those sites might look like.
Okay.
But like, for example, this developer had a scatter site down in La Alma Lincoln Park that they were able to purchase and re-agree on. So those, I don't remember how many units, like 30 units will continue on for another 30 years at that specific AMI range.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how they came upon it and were able to purchase that, but it's just an idea. And if there was a way for the city to identify, that way we could put that kind of incentives out to either, I don't know if the city could purchase it or if it would need to go to private developers, but it may be a way to keep that housing stock in that price range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jonathan, did you want to add?
Noting, I guess, not in addition to that, but because I know we're running low on time and we're trying to get through all these bullet points, I did notice this last one, encouraging engagement with community groups like CCDC to ensure quality and efficacy of supportive housing approaches. This reminded me of another element in the plan that's related to disability access and housing. We encourage in some parts of the plan the creation of conservation overlays, which is sort of at their face, I'm not necessarily against, but what we've been seeing in the north side a lot lately is conservation overlays proposed that expressly require housing forms that are not good for aging in place or disabled residents, such as requiring lift off the ground and stairs approaching the building, requiring historical aesthetics such as knobs instead of levers on exterior doors, all things that from like a universal design perspective essentially prevent anyone in a wheelchair from living in these homes. So along the lines of like quality and efficacy of supportive housing approaches, I'd love if we'd have a similar recommendation to say discourage conservation overlays or design requirements that conflict with universal design approaches.
Oh, I like that recommendation. Okay. Yeah, noted. That's a great point made. And in the name of inclusion, right, we're always trying to continue to make spaces more inclusive. So that's a great point, Jonathan. Kathy, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment in regards to what Taylor was mentioning, where we're talking about how housing can be preserved or looking at the need for a certain area median income. And certainly some of the areas that we're seeing that have happened with the Urban Land Institute in outright buying parcels of property that they will work with a developer on to develop, specifically off of 10th and Sheridan, it is already happened. And I think we can see that somewhat with land trusts as another way where maybe they don't own the land, but they own the building as an owner. So again, that can kind of keep more of a capacity to have a range of incomes within a neighborhood by preserving some of those places. So I think some of that has already happened, certainly in Villa Park. And I don't know whether areas Urban Land Institute has been able to purchase considering the market, but the market is maybe trying to get to a more normal place. So that might be another opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for that additional feedback, Kathy. As we wrap up here, it's 5:12. Again, I would love to get us off by 5:15. If we need to push to 5:20, we can though. Jean, I want to go back to your comment in the chat to see if you wanted to unpack that at all with regards to the new private development going into Sun Valley.
No, not really. In fact, I'm thinking it probably was set out of context I thought I was just hearing about, rents, not necessarily, I don't know. I think I might have come too late to it, and I think I caught something that probably isn't accurate. But for what it's worth, we do have a new private development that's going in, and they are looking at charging pretty much very close to downtown rates. I know that we've already seen rental rates go up in the West Colfax area with new developments. But whatever I was hearing about kind of lower rates because of where we're located, that doesn't seem to, and I could have easily have misunderstood that, so I apologize. But Sun Valley seems to somehow, being seen as able to be competitive, just because of the housing need and its location with, more of the central rates.
Okay, no, it's still very helpful, Jean, and we appreciate you just updating us on the development. Do you mind if we ask where those cross section or where the development is located that's going to take place?
Well, it's actually at 2715 West Holden Place.
Okay. Just so we can kind of look at it on the back end for research.
Yeah, it hasn't happened. It's a modular project.
Okay.
So while they haven't even broke ground yet to develop the platform, if Denver DHA can get the 13th Avenue and Bryant Street done, they've been waiting on that because they're ready to, proceed. And once they do it, it's just a matter of a couple of weeks.
Okay. Thank you for that update. Kathy, is that an old hand or did you want to share? Oh, you're on mute, Kathy.
Yes, old hand that has not been lowered.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, I want to be respectful of time. Again, it's 5:15. But if there's anything else burning that we want to unpack before we end this meeting, feel free. No pressure. We can definitely add an extra 5 minutes. If not, I do want to end so that we can get over to the other meeting for the park naming, whoever's interested in that. Anything else?
I have a wild card question that we can totally put aside, and I don't think that this exists, but
Go ahead. Yeah.
we have a strong desire for anti-displacement to preserve existing affordable housing. And we have a strong sustainability interest to not demolish houses that have incredible embodied carbon and material use. I don't know if there's any policy. I'm sure if it exists, it would have been considered with the Green Building Code. But if there's anything that on climate justice and gentrification goals, if there's any sort of policy out there that places a condition on getting a demolition permit to having a plan for housing that meets a particular standard beyond just you're building within what the general zoning allows. And I doubt that that's possible, but like we've been talking a lot about the problem where things get scraped and then stuff that gets built in its place is not affordable to most people, and it's incredibly climate intensive. And just curious if there's any housing preservation around there, or if there's like conditional permits that you can demolish if you meet a certain level of performance in your proposed review. That could also include, you could be allowed to build up to a higher density if you meet certain standards. But if not, we're keeping the building with all of the embodied energy and materials that are part of it.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I'll kind of quickly take a stab at that. And then if Cortland has anything else to add, but I think what you're speaking to is on the other side of the wheelhouse of community planning and development, more in the development services side of things, where they actually review the plans, the proposed concepts and all of that. A lot of, I think what you're speaking to has to do with a number of different intersections, right? One of them being like the green building ordinance. I know that's a big one. We have the new multi-unit, multi-family, low energy ordinance that just went into place. So it might be a number of things. We might need to follow up on that just because that is a lot to unpack. Cortland, do you have any follow-up just with regards to that question that Elizabeth has?
As to whether that exists, I don't think that it does. As to whether it's possible, I don't know. I would think, there's other conditions on demolition, like anything that's torn down has to go through a review from historic preservation to make sure that it's not a historically significant resource or potentially one, right? So that's a condition that's put on demolition. So I don't know that I've heard the idea of having other ones for like tied to future development, but I'm sure a land use lawyer could probably weigh in on that. There are programs in place for trying to preserve affordable housing that currently exists, to get people to opt in to making, income restricted, for X number of years moving forward and things like that. So it's not tied to demolition, but it is a way to kind of get at what you're talking about of housing affordability in units that already exist instead of having to build something new. I think, that kind of, starts to get you there, those kinds of programs.
Thanks. I appreciate that, Cortland. And I think it would be interesting if we were able to have something in the housing section that names policies for transitions. I love what Shayla introduced. If there are policies that we could recommend to support some of that approach to preserve, where extra opportunity to find people who would maintain something in the same way. Or I know someone had recommended something about before a sale of a multifamily unit, that there's an option for residents to buy or turn it into a limited equity co-op or something. I think I saw that in the plan, but maybe there's like a section that could call out how to handle transitions. Anyway, I sorry to throw that wild card in there. I get to 100 time and close out, but it's been a question that I've had for a while, and it seemed a little pie in the sky, but also like gentrification and climate justice intersections are key.
Shayla, go ahead.
I just had one more thing to add in there, and I know that this has happened to some of the motels along Colfax, but if that could be a source of us identifying units that could be turned into studio apartments that meet the needs of that 30 to 50% AMI as well. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. And I think it's just like maybe owners that are already wanting to sell, but they're wanting to sell at a market rate. If there's a way that we could put suggestions for policy for it to be acquired for affordable housing instead of demoed.
Yeah, no, thank you for that added feedback with regards to the housing section, Shayla. That's very helpful. We'll definitely note that, look into it, see how we can fine tune the recommendations we currently have. Maybe we need to add one. We'll kind of talk about what that looks like, but that's very helpful. And again, everyone, thank you for your time. It's 5:22, so I do need to jump off. I hate to cut us off early, but it's all for very good reasoning for Valverde. So we're very excited to go to this park naming advisory board item. And I'm excited to share just on behalf of the West team, the support and how it ties to everything we're doing. And even the 1991 Valverde plan, which is 31 years old. So this is exciting and monumental, I think, particularly for Yvonne and all the longtime residents in Valverde. So thank you for allowing us to finish early. I will send out an email with sort of wrapping up what we'll cover in mobility, kind of bringing back the maps so you all can review. I highly recommend to take another look at the mobility section in preparation for next week. That way we can really unpack and have an in-depth conversation around that last big complex section that we need to unpack together. And then the very last session will be summaries, report backs, and kind of workshopping with you all before we head to the larger steering committee to provide that transparency and that overall report back from the small working group. So we are almost there. Hang in there, guys. All right. Thank
Have
you
a
all so
great
much.
evening.
Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.